What's up, guys? VinceDao here, and today we're doing 3 talking points that conservatives should stop saying. The reason I do this is because as a conservative myself, let's admit it, we are losing. We have set ourselves up for defeat repeatedly. We have let the left take over everything, and frankly, it's time for a large-scale course correction. And I hope that I can be of some service in that course correction, so why not? Let's address 3 common conservative talking points that you need to stop using, and I'll tell you why. Before I begin, be sure to boost this video by leaving a like and subscribe if you're new. Okay, let's begin with number 1, and that's that the left is virtue signaling. You sure hear this one a lot, don't you? Oh, Hollywood celebrities are virtue signaling. Liberals at my high school are virtue signaling. Here's the thing. The left never actually virtue signals. They don't. They enact their virtues or lack thereof. We seem to have this concept that the left just stands there and whines about everything, but that could not be further from the truth. The left did not take over every institution in America and now use those against us by virtue signaling. They did it through action, and that's exactly what the left does. They act. It's not virtue signaling when the left takes over all the institutions and uses them to enact their goals. It's not virtue signaling when the left weaponizes those institutions against conservatives. In fact, I would argue that in many ways, the talking point of virtue signaling is largely a projection by conservatives. Because, it's not virtue signaling to do what the left does, and that is take power and enact your goals. No, it's virtue signaling to stand there on the other side with very little institutional power, and even where we do have the power, a very strong unwillingness to actually use that power to do anything, and just to stand there and say, well, what if the roles were reversed? Imagine if the roles were reversed in this situation. Yeah, that's virtue signaling. That is the definition of virtue signaling. I hate to say this, but frankly, conservatives are the biggest virtue signalers in America, because we literally just cry about stuff and never actually do anything about it. And honestly, even to the extent to which the left does supposedly virtue signal, let me ask this other question. Why is that even a bad thing for them? That is exactly why the left is so effective at controlling the culture. Because yes, they obviously do have the institutions on their side, but they also have a huge army of useful idiots on standby, ready to help them bombard the culture with their propaganda until that propaganda becomes the new cultural norm. And the truth is, the average leftist is way more willing to be outspoken in the culture than the average conservative. And hence, who do you think is going to ultimately control the Overton window of the culture in the long term? Yeah, exactly. Sure, it may be cringe and dumb when everyone from your high school changes their profile picture to BLM or a vaccine message or a Ukraine flag, but guess what? I'm going to guess that most conservatives there didn't do anything in response because they were too scared to, and so hence, where do you expect the mainstream consensus of the culture to move towards in the long run? Propaganda works, mass psychosis, whatever you want to call it, absolutely works, and one could even make the case that our aversion against so-called virtue signaling is part of the reason why we cannot lead an effective cultural rebellion against the powers that be. Because it's like, oh, I don't want to create counterculture because that would be virtue signaling. My political affiliation will be kept up to myself because I don't really want to virtue signal, Yeah, just stop saying this. It's incredibly cringe, and it's not even an effective talking point, because what it basically says, what the virtue signaling argument basically says, is that the left actually has, good intentions and morals, hence they have virtues, but they're just kind of incompetent. They're not super effective at enacting them. They're well-intended, they're just not that good at what they want to do. When no, actually, the left has very bad intentions, and they're very good about enacting them. So let's just be honest about that. Not only is one of these things more honest, but honestly, it's more effective rhetoric anyway. It makes the left actually sound like a force of evil that you should be fearful of them taking power. And people are more likely to oppose that than what they just perceive to be a bunch of lovable idiots who aren't the most competent and don't really know what they're doing, No. The left doesn't have good intentions. And maybe the only reason that some people think that they're supposedly virtue signaling is because we're pretending that they do have good intentions. Here's a prime example. Oh, you say you support equality, but you actually hate white people? How is that equal? You hypocrite. No, you fool. They don't care about equality. What they really want is power, and they want to usurp power from the traditional ruling class of this country in favor of themselves. Liberal concepts like equality, democracy, and diversity are ultimately just pretexts for their power grab against the traditional rulers of Western society. Stop pretending like it's anything else. They don't actually have virtuous goals. They don't even really care about the slogans that that they say, it's really just a power grab. Okay, the second talking point that we need to stop is not just the phrase, but really the broader concept of the radical left. We have this tendency to say, well, see, your old school liberals, they were okay, but now it's the radical left that is going too far. A very common phrase. I'm sure you hear every single conservative use the term radical left, but here's the problem. There is no such thing as the radical left. There is simply just the left. I understand why we may think that the concept of the radical left might be effective rhetoric, but in the grand scheme of things, there really is no distinction between the supposedly moderate left and the radical left. They act in unison. They will ultimately get you to the same point regardless. And the LGBT movement is a great example of this. So many people now look at Leah Thomas and say, well, now I think that this has gone too far. But the truth is that removing the traditional, biblically based, objective standards on sex and relationships that governed American society for centuries were always bound to descend into the sexual anarchy that we see today. Simply put, the moment that we no longer said that marriage is an objective covenant with God between a man and a woman, we set ourselves up for this point. As we can tell, the slippery slope fallacy is literally not a fallacy at all. And the truth is that the supposedly moderate or disaffected liberals who are against the Leah Thomas stuff today will be perfectly on board with that stuff 10 years from now. We know that to be true because that's exactly what has happened on every other LGBT debate and cultural debate in general. What was supposedly radical 10 years ago has now become normal and mainstream on both sides. And as we can tell in hindsight, the incremental or supposedly moderate victories that left-wing cultural movements always get in the beginning are always pretexts for much more radical things later on. Hence, it is very concerning to me to see the right make allies with the supposedly anti-woke left against the radical left, because this is only delaying the inevitable by a little bit. The truth is that if we want to be authentically effective, we cannot just oppose the current radical left. We have to oppose the entire left. Conservatives accepting and normalizing the left's previous victories as being good and normal gives the left more credence to push harder for their current radicalism. Conservatives, giving up on gay marriage and basically every other LGBT issue enables the left to do exactly what they are currently doing. And if we want to stop the advance of the left, we cannot just stand here. We have to actually row against the current. We have to turn back the clock. We have to be actively pushing the Overton window of acceptable cultural discourse to the right. And that, of course, means that we cannot make allies with the moderate left. In fact, what we really ought to do is say to these people, hey, if you oppose the current radicalism, what you really ought to do is wake up and realize that your supposedly moderate ideology enabled this. So drop the facade and just become an actual conservative. But if not, screw you, because you're the enemy as well. The moderate left is not our friend. And yeah, that may make our tent a little bit smaller, but guess what? At least our movement will actually push back against something instead of literally just allowing the left to march onwards. So again, there's no distinction between the moderate left and the radical left. Their agenda is the same in the end. They will get you to the same point in the end, and we really ought to be against both of them and all of it if we don't want Drag Queen Story Hour and all this other stuff to be normalized, okay? Now, the last talking point we are going to debunk is a very classic one that has frankly rebranded itself in many forms over the years, but is still basically the same thing at its core. And it's still really a core tenet of conservative thinking. And that's that, I don't care what you do so long as I don't have to pay for it. Basically, America's about freedom, bro. So do whatever you want so long as my tax dollars don't have to fund it and you keep it away from my children, generally speaking. Many people think that this is actually what conservatism is all about, right? Ayn Rand is the model conservative, as we all know, and that cannot be further from the truth. This supposed understanding of freedom, quote unquote, is not a fundamentally conservative concept whatsoever. Edmund Burke, the philosophical founding father of conservatism, defined society as being a moral bond between the living, the dead, and those yet to be born, which is to say that as conservatives, we actually do have a duty to care about the health of our fellow countrymen, our culture, and our society. We should care whether or not tradition is being maintained or destroyed in society. We should care about the de-Christianization and the mass secularization of America and what it means, if for no other reason than that actually the way the culture goes actually does impact you. And as we can currently see, if you let the left take over, they won't exactly respect your request to just not tax you and leave you alone. So not only should we 100% be culture warriors, but we should also understand that government and politics actually can influence culture, and we should not be scared to use these institutions to turn back the clock. We clearly see how Roe v. Wade in legalizing gay marriage has so drastically pushed the culture to the left over time on these issues, as one example. Because over time, once these things became legal, guess what? They became cultural norms as well. They became an accepted part of American life. Abortion and gay marriage are now cultural norms. And on the other hand, to give kind of a right-wing example, it's undeniably true that Trump and DeSantis have given the state of Florida a conservative cultural identity through their political elections and through their political actions. So this is to say, there absolutely is a two-way relationship between politics and culture. You absolutely can legislate morality, and if you want your country to remain a moral country, I'd argue that you absolutely have to do so. So 100%, ban left-wing ideology and mandate patriotic education in the schools. Ban abortion, bring back school prayer, incentivize family creation. If you don't want the left knocking on your door, you absolutely have to do about all of these things. It is not enough to simply stand there and say, well, do whatever you want, let my country totally die so long as it doesn't affect me. That's a fallacy. It absolutely does affect you, and even if it didn't, you should still care. I don't think that's very noble to just not care about the people around you. That's not very loving. That's not very patriotic, I would say. Okay, with that being said, that'll wrap up today's video. Thank you very much for watching, ladies and gentlemen. If you liked the video, be sure to like, be sure to subscribe. Let me know what you think. Drop down in the comments. Tell me some common conservative talking points that you think we need to scrap as a movement. This will probably become something of a series. Maybe I'll do one of these like every month or every few months, just talk about, hey, this is cringe. We need to stop doing this. But with that being said, thank you very much for watching. God bless. Like and subscribe. Alpha moves only. See you guys next time, and peace.
Americanism, not globalism, will be our credo as long